Ebony had always been known as the girl whose heart was softer than rain-soaked earth, the kind of softness that made people trust her without hesitation. At 25, she moved through the village like a quiet blessing, carrying small pouches of herbs, warm smiles, and words that felt like healing water on aching wounds. Children stopped crying when she touched their foreheads. Old men swore their joints hurt less when she whispered a prayer over their hands. Even strangers who passed through the dusty paths of the village said they felt lighter after speaking with her, as if she carried some invisible balm within her spirit. But though the village adored her, her own home felt like the coldest hut in the land. Her aunt barely made eye contact with her, always muttering under her breath that Ebony's kindness was nothing but a facade. Her stepbrother treated her like a shadow, dismissing her presence unless he needed something: food, help, or an excuse to avoid chores. They acted as though she were a burden, as though her tenderness made her weak and unimportant, even though they benefited from her healing hands more than anyone else. Every morning, before the sun finished rising, Ebony walked to the small spring at the edge of the forest to gather fresh water for her remedies. The birds greeted her as if she were one of their own, fluttering close, singing their early songs. Ebony often paused to listen, the peaceful sounds warming her chest in a way she didn't understand. Sometimes her heartbeat felt too strong, too bright, like a drum echoing under the layers of her skin. It happened especially when someone cried or when she sensed someone's pain. She didn't know why, but her heart responded as if it carried a power that wanted to leap out and take shape. She told no one about it. Some things were safer to keep hidden. People came to her hut from all corners of the village, women seeking relief from headaches, farmers asking for charms to protect their crops, and mothers bringing sick children wrapped in woven cloth. Ebony welcomed them all with gentle hands. She would listen before she treated, letting them pour out their griefs and worries. Her aunt often scowled from the doorway, calling her too soft, too emotional, too eager to fix everyone else's problems. But Ebony knew the truth: compassion was not weakness. It was strength, the kind that required a steady spirit and a heart willing to feel deeply. Yet deep inside, she sensed that her gentleness was not merely her nature. She felt something ancient humming quietly beneath her ribs, something older than her village, older than her bloodline. It stirred when she comforted children, it glowed when she healed someone, it whispered when she sat alone by the spring. She sometimes saw flashes, shapes, shadows, colors she couldn't explain. Once, when she placed her hand over a grieving widow's chest, both of them felt a warmth that made the woman gasp. Ebony pulled back immediately, startled by the intensity. What was that? Why did her heart react as though it held fire? She often wondered if she inherited something from her mother, a woman she barely remembered but whose presence she sometimes felt in dreams: soft singing, soft hands, soft warmth. There were stories told in whispers, stories of a line of women who could see truths hidden from others, who could heal not just bodies but spirits. But Ebony never asked, her family never spoke of such things. Still, the signs were there, subtle but undeniable. Her heart was not just soft, it was powerful, ancient, waiting. And though she lived quietly, unaware of the storm approaching, the world was already beginning to shift around her. The first time her stepbrother noticed the young suitor watching Ebony from across the marketplace, a sharp bitterness twisted inside him. It wasn't admiration or concern, it was jealousy mixed with fear. Sephew had always been compared to Ebony, though never out loud. People praised her kindness, her skills, her calming presence, while they looked at him with suspicion, annoyance, or impatience. He hated it. He hated how she made him feel small without even trying. And now, seeing someone admire her, seeing her smile shyly back, sparked something dark in him. He could not allow her to rise above him. Not her, not the girl he'd spent years pushing down. His mother, Ebony's aunt, noticed it too, the way the suitor asked about Ebony's herbs, how he lingered near her stall, how Ebony's eyes softened when she noticed him. And the idea of Ebony being loved, cherished, or chosen made the aunt's heart burn with an old, unresolved jealousy. She had spent her life believing she deserved admiration, but it was always Ebony people spoke of, even when Ebony's mother was still alive. Ebony had inherited her mother's gentle beauty, her calm voice, her spirit that made people feel safe. The aunt had inherited nothing but a restless bitterness. Seeing Ebony happy only reminded her of everything she herself lacked. By the time the moon rose over the village that night, the two of them had already decided, without ever needing to say the words, that Ebony must not be allowed joy. If she gained love, she would gain confidence. If she gained confidence, she would gain influence. And if she gained influence, Sephew and his mother feared they would lose control. So they formed a silent alliance, woven from envy and cruelty, bound by the need to diminish her. They began with whispers, soft, poisonous phrases slipped into conversations. Ebony is not what she seems. Her herbs confuse men's minds, be careful. She pretends to be gentle so people will trust her. The aunt spoke with the confidence of someone who believed her own lies. Sephew added fuel by pretending to overhear things, acting concerned and sympathetic as he spread rumors. They chose their targets carefully. Women who feared losing their husband's attention, elders who disliked change, and young girls who envied Ebony's natural charm. Soon, a small group of villagers began casting suspicious glances at her, unsure why they felt uneasy, unaware they were repeating another person's venom. When whispers alone didn't feel like enough, the aunt escalated. She created stories, accusing Ebony of using charms to draw men near, claiming she overheard Ebony mocking the villagers behind their backs. Sephew played his part perfectly, acting heartbroken, telling people he wished he could save Ebony from her own darkness. The more lies they spread, the more they justified their own hate. Inside the hut, they shifted to emotional attacks. Cold remarks became cutting words. Chores were doubled. Meals were withheld. They would accuse her of forgetting tasks she had never been given, of breaking items she never touched, of being ungrateful when she tried to help. Each attempt was designed to make her question herself, to make her feel small. Their goal was simple: break her spirit until she became silent and harmless, a shadow they could control. But what they didn't understand was this: every cruelty they planted, every lie they whispered, every wound they tried to carve into Ebony's heart was awakening something ancient within her, something that would one day rise and consume everything they held dear. Ebony had always trusted easily, believing in the goodness of people even when shadows lingered around them. She had never questioned her stepbrother's attention, her aunt's presence in the household, or the way villagers came to her seeking help. She believed that kindness was a bridge, not a weakness, and she walked that bridge every day without hesitation. But the sun had barely risen when the world she trusted so completely began to crumble. She had gone to the kitchen early that morning to fetch water when she heard muffled voices behind the slightly ajar door of her aunt's room. Curiosity, gentle and unassuming, made her pause and listen. What she heard made her blood freeze. Her aunt's voice, sharp and low, carried words that twisted her stomach. The moment she thinks someone cares for her, we strike. She'll never see it coming. Her gifts make her valuable, yes, but her heart makes her weak. We'll take advantage, and by the time she realizes, she'll be too shattered to fight back. Ebony's fingers went cold, her hands gripping the doorframe as if holding herself upright. Then came Sephew's voice, carrying the same venomous intent. I've watched her for months. Every smile, every prayer, every word she offers to the villagers. Everything is a tool we can manipulate. People adore her, but they don't know she's mine to control if we play it right. The words sank deep, like cold stones dropped into the soft earth of her chest. She staggered back, disbelief striking her like a sudden storm. The people she had called family, the very ones who lived under the same roof, the ones she trusted to protect her and love her, were plotting against her. Every laugh they had shared, every small gesture of apparent care, every word of guidance she had accepted. They were all lies, carefully constructed to manipulate and trap her. Her heart throbbed painfully, each beat echoing betrayal louder than the last. She wanted to scream, to run, to confront them, but her body betrayed her. The warmth in her limbs left, leaving a hollow ache that made her knees buckle. Ebony sank to the floor, tears blurring her vision as the weight of the revelation pressed down like a relentless tide. The cracks in her heart were not only emotional, they felt physical, as if something inside her chest had fractured beyond repair. Memories of the past months, the late nights spent helping the villagers, the careful preparation of remedies, the comforting of children, the quiet attempts to bring peace to every quarrel, now twisted cruelly. She realized that every act of love she had offered in that household had been observed, measured, and exploited for someone else's gain. But as she lay there, trembling and feeling the icy tendrils of despair creep into her soul, something else began to stir. A warmth, faint but insistent, rose from deep within her chest, pushing against the cracks, flowing into the fractured places. Her heart, though wounded, began to pulse with a rhythm that was no longer entirely her own. It throbbed with a strange, ancient energy that she could not name, a force that had always been part of her but had waited for this moment of deepest betrayal to awaken. The warmth spread through her veins, lighting her fingertips and the tips of her hair, leaving a trail of tingling fire in its wake. The tears fell faster, but now there was a new edge to them, a fierce, electric awareness. She could feel the pulse of the ancestors, of women who had come before her, women whose hearts had been broken and mended, women whose love had been twisted by those too small to understand it, yet whose spirits had burned brighter because of the pain. They whispered to her, not in words, but in shivers along her spine and heat in her chest, guiding her awareness. They told her that the gift in her heart was not a weakness, it was a weapon, a force that could reveal truth and punish those who tried to manipulate it. Ebony's tears turned into something else, determination, energy, a readiness she had never felt. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the power beneath her ribs swell and twist, filling her with a strange courage. Her heart, once soft and vulnerable, now glowed with something unyielding. She could not yet see the full extent of it, but she knew that she had been chosen, awakened, and transformed. The betrayal had shattered her trust, yes, but in the cracks, the light of something ancient had entered, and the world around her would never be the same again. The room around Ebony felt impossibly still, yet inside her chest, a storm was gathering. Each beat of her heart reverberated through her body, echoing like the rhythm of distant drums, strong and commanding, demanding attention from every corner of her being. The pain of betrayal still throbbed, sharp and insistent, but it no longer weighed her down. It became a fuel, a spark igniting something deeper, something she had never fully understood. Her heartbeat was no longer just her own. It carried with it the pulse of generations, ancestors whose lives had been shaped by love and suffering, by courage and cruelty. A warmth began in her core, growing until it radiated outward like molten gold through her veins. The light was subtle at first, a faint glow that brushed her fingertips and illuminated the tears on her cheeks, but it grew steadily, filling her vision with shimmering radiance. Her heartbeat became louder, louder than any drum she had ever heard, vibrating not only in her ears but in her very bones. Each pulse seemed to summon echoes of those who had come before her, voices whispering across time, "Your heart is more than flesh and blood. It is a vessel of truth, a weapon against deceit, a flame that cannot be tamed by cruelty." Ebony blinked, and in the flicker of her glowing vision she saw them. Shadows first, then fully formed shapes, ancestors draped in flowing robes, their eyes gleaming with the same fire she felt within herself. They moved around her as if dancing to the rhythm of her heartbeat, their presence commanding and awe-inspiring. They had been women and men who had wielded the heart fire, a force older than memory itself, a power that revealed what was hidden and punished those who dared to harm the innocent. Their faces were stern yet kind, filled with pride and sorrow, and they did not speak in words but in emotions, waves of understanding and power that washed over her. Her heartbeat shifted again, now a drumroll of impending reckoning. The warmth in her chest became a living thing, moving like liquid light, twisting through her veins, pulsing in time with every breath. Her hands shook, not with fear but with the intensity of the awakening. She felt her senses expand, the slight tremor of the walls, the faint creak of wood settling, the whispers of the wind outside carrying secrets she had never noticed before. The heart fire within her did not only illuminate, it connected her to the very fabric of truth, to the hidden intentions of those around her. She realized with both awe and terror that no lie would escape her notice, no deceit could hide from the force now coursing through her. Visions danced before her eyes. She saw her mother holding her as a child, whispering words she had long forgotten but now felt in her bones. She saw her grandmother tending herbs in the moonlight, her hands glowing faintly as if she had known the power would pass down through the bloodline. She saw women and men from ages past, each facing those who tried to crush them, each summoning the heart fire to defend truth and punish cruelty. Their struggles, their victories, their losses, all flowed into her heart, mingling with her own pain and transforming it into something unstoppable. Ebony's tears of heartbreak mingled with this awakening energy. Each sob seemed to feed the light, fueling it, shaping it, giving it definition. She felt her heartbeat synchronize with the rhythm of the ancestors, the drums of justice, and the pulse of the earth itself. The room seemed to vibrate with her power, as if acknowledging the birth of something extraordinary. She understood, finally, that the heart fire was not simply a reaction to pain, it was a force that required intention, courage, and purpose. As the glow expanded and the visions faded slowly, she felt clarity, sharp and unwavering, settle over her mind. Betrayal could no longer weaken her. Cruelty could no longer intimidate her. The heart fire had awakened, not just as a shield but as a weapon, as a revelation, as a force that would demand accountability. Ebony rose slowly to her feet, her chest still glowing, her heartbeat steady but resonant, knowing that she had crossed a threshold. The girl who had been soft, gentle, and trusting had transformed. In the place of heartbreak, a force older than the village itself now thrummed, ready to shape the world according to truth, justice, and the ancient fire that had finally found its host. Ebony stood in the center of the hut, the golden glow of the heart fire still pulsing through her veins, casting long dancing shadows against the walls. The warmth inside her chest had grown steady now, like a heartbeat that belonged to something far older and far wiser than herself. And then the voices came, not words as humans spoke but thoughts and feelings, images and emotions carried on waves of energy. They were her ancestors, a lineage of women and men whose hearts had once burned with the same fire, whose lives had been marked by both suffering and courage. They circled her, surrounding her in an invisible embrace, and she felt their presence deep in her bones. "You have been chosen," a voice murmured through the glow, soft yet commanding, vibrating with authority and inevitability. It carried a weight that made her knees buckle briefly, though she held herself upright, trembling with awe. "Chosen to restore balance in your lineage, to heal what was broken, and to right what has been twisted by those too small to understand the gift you bear." Another presence, older, heavier with wisdom, added, "Your heart has been shattered, yes, but in that fracture lies the doorway. A broken heart is a doorway, but once opened, it cannot be closed." The words struck her with an intensity she could not describe. A door once opened could not be shut again. The betrayal, the lies, the cruelty she had endured, these were not only wounds, they were keys, unlocking something ancient that had waited for her. Ebony's chest throbbed, the glow of the heart fire brightening, sending warmth radiating through her limbs. The ancestors' presence pressed on her awareness, insisting she understand that the force she now carried was more than a tool of revenge. It was a responsibility, a power bound to truth and justice, one that could not be contained once awakened. Images flashed before her, visions of her mother and grandmother, of women who had faced betrayal and hardship, each carrying the same fire, each shaping their lives by it. She saw them standing firm against oppressors, healing the wounded, exposing deceit and protecting the innocent. And now it was her turn. She could feel the lineage's expectations and hopes wrapping around her like a cloak, heavy yet comforting, urging her to rise beyond fear, beyond pain, beyond the limits she had known. Ebony's mind raced with possibilities, questions, and fears, yet her body felt steadier than it had ever felt before. She realized she had been transformed in ways she could not yet comprehend. The girl who had trusted too easily, whose heart had been tender and open, was no longer the same. The heart fire inside her made her stronger, sharper, attuned to truths that others could hide no longer. But the weight of responsibility pressed down. She did not yet know what consequences her awakening would bring. As the light settled into a gentle, constant glow, she understood that life could never return to the simplicity it once had. Every heartbeat now carried power, every thought carried responsibility, and every step she took would ripple across her village and her family. The ancestors' presence receded slowly, their whispers lingering like a promise. She had been chosen, the door was open, and the world would never be the same. Ebony inhaled deeply, feeling the fire settle within her, feeling the strength of generations pulse alongside her own. She was ready, though she did not yet fully understand the road ahead, nor the consequences that would unfold with the awakening of her heart. The morning air in the village carried an unusual hum, a subtle vibration that prickled at the skin and whispered through the leaves of the trees. Birds perched silently on branches, their usual songs silenced as though the world itself was holding its breath. From nowhere, drums began to sound, deep, resonant, echoing from places where no drummer stood. The rhythm was steady and insistent, pulsing through the earth, seeping into walls, and vibrating through the feet of anyone who dared to walk through the village. Windows rattled softly, smoke from cooking fires wavered unnaturally, and even the wind seemed to circle houses, moving with purpose, brushing along rooftops, rustling the thatch and sending shivers down the spines of the villagers. Ebony stepped from the hut at that very moment, her feet bare against the dirt path, her eyes glowing faintly with the light of the heart fire. The glow was subtle at first, a soft shimmer, but as she walked, it grew, tracing her steps like a trail of fire, reflecting in the eyes of those who watched her with fear or admiration. The villagers noticed something strange, a tugging sensation deep in their chests, as though invisible fingers pulled at the truth buried within them. The gentle folk, those who had never harbored malice, felt nothing, only awe and a subtle warmth. But those who had lied, cheated, or plotted against her felt immediate panic. Their hearts thudded erratically, their breaths caught in their throats, and their minds raced with memories they wished to bury. Sefu's face paled as he stepped out of the shadows of his mother's hut. His chest constricted violently, a sharp pain that made him stagger back. His aunt clutched her sides, whispering frantic denials as though words alone could escape the force that now sought truth. Every secret they had crafted, every manipulation and lie, quivered violently within them, trembling under the pull of Ebony's power. Even the villagers who had once feared her now watched, mesmerized, as the girl they had dismissed, ignored, or envied walked among them, the light in her eyes burning steadily, a warning and a revelation all at once. As she moved through the market, the glowing pulse of her heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the drumming that no one could see, each step a beat, each breath a measure. Herbs on stalls quivered, baskets of fruit trembled, and the earth itself felt alive beneath her feet. People's thoughts were pulled outward, small lies spilling from minds like water from cracked vessels. Words that had been whispered in shadows now hung in the air, exposed to anyone who dared look closely. Ebony did not speak, she did not need to. The force of the heart fire carried her presence, her truth, and the ancestral command that deception could no longer hide. Children followed at a distance, sensing safety in her light, unaware of the storm it carried. Women whispered in awe, some stepping aside to avoid the radiant power, others bowing their heads in reverence. Men who had always ignored her felt shame ripple through them like cold water. And in the homes of the guilty, tremors of panic rose uncontrollably. Sefu's eyes darted to every corner, expecting someone, or something, to strike him down, while his mother's lips moved in a silent prayer, futile and desperate. Their secrets were no longer their own. They twitched, recoiling as if the truth itself had clawed inside their chests, tugging at the cords of their hearts, exposing every deceit, every betrayal, every malicious act they had committed. By the time Ebony reached the center of the village, the drumming had risen to a deafening crescendo. The wind whipped around her, scattering papers, leaves, and the loose thatch of roofs. She raised her hands slightly, not to threaten, but to let the pulse of her presence extend outward. The guilty could feel it, a heavy, undeniable tug of justice and revelation. Even if they tried to flee, they could not escape the force of the heart fire, which sought the truth like a predator scenting its prey. The villagers watched in awe, their fear tempered by wonder as Ebony's glowing eyes swept over them. Those who had harmed her or plotted against her felt their own hearts quiver, shaking with the weight of guilt and the unrelenting pull of exposure. Secrets whispered among themselves now clawed their way to the surface, a tremor of inevitability that they could neither resist nor ignore. Ebony's steps carried her through the village like a tide of light and power, leaving no shadow unilluminated, no lie unchallenged, and no heart untested. The pulse of her awakened force radiated through the village, a tangible, unstoppable truth, and the world of deceit that had once surrounded her began to crack irreparably. Ebony's grief had never felt heavier than that day, but it no longer lingered as sorrow. It had transformed into something fierce, a spiritual energy that pulsed through the earth itself. The moment she stepped into the clearing near the edge of the village, the sky shifted as though sensing the eruption of power inside her. Clouds darkened unnaturally, swirling in tight spirals above the treetops. The air thickened with anticipation, and the wind began to whisper in voices that carried both warning and revelation. Every beat of her heart sent tremors through the ground, as if the earth itself recognized the presence of the heart fire and responded to it. Lightning struck first, not the random jagged flashes that usually tore across stormy skies, but lightning shaped like veins, branching across the ground in patterns that mirrored the pulse of her chest. It carved paths through the soil, illuminating the village in flashes of raw, electric brilliance. The storm was alive as if summoned directly by her pain and her power, each strike carrying a message of reckoning to the guilty. Whispers rode the wind, voices unfamiliar yet undeniably human, filling ears and minds alike. See what you have done. See the harm you have caused. See the truth you cannot deny. Those who had harmed Ebony or plotted against her staggered back, clutching their chests as if invisible hands had reached inside to twist and reveal their own hearts. Sefu's eyes widened in terror as visions of every lie he had told, every manipulation he had attempted, every cruel word he had whispered, played before him like living memories. His aunt shrieked as she saw herself, hunched over Ebony's childhood, stealing opportunities, mocking her subtle power, laughing at her kindness as though it were a flaw. Each vision burned with clarity, unrelenting and accusatory, forcing them to confront acts they had long hoped would remain hidden. The villagers watched, powerless, as the storm intensified. Lightning arced closer to huts, striking the earth with a sound that shook the walls, and wind twisted violently through the market, scattering goods and papers. But fear mingled with awe. Even the most skeptical realized that this was no ordinary tempest. Something sacred and unstoppable had awakened, and it radiated from Ebony. The people who had once laughed at her softness now understood that her heartbreak was not weakness. It was a crucible, forging power that the village had never witnessed before. Ebony stood at the eye of the storm, her glowing eyes steady, her pulse synchronized with the chaotic rhythm around her. The heart fire coursed through every vein in her body, connecting her to the storm and to the truths she now carried. She raised her hands slightly, not to strike but to guide, to let the energy flow outward with purpose. The lightning leapt in arcs that seemed to respond to her motions, and the wind carried every whispered truth to those who needed to hear it. The guilty could not hide, they could not escape. The storm had eyes, ears, and memory, and it held them accountable in ways no human force ever could. Even those who had only watched, who had neither harmed nor betrayed her, felt the tremors in their hearts. They sensed the magnitude of the power that had been born from sorrow and trust betrayed. This was not a punishment wielded by a single hand but the awakening of a force older than the village, older than the ancestors who had whispered to her in dreams. Ebony's heartbreak had become a living storm, and it demanded attention, respect, and recognition. As lightning traced the veins of the earth and the wind carried every confession and secret aloft, the villagers knew with an undeniable certainty that Ebony's power could not be controlled, bargained with, or ignored. Her pain had become a storm, but it was also a reckoning, a luminous and terrifying truth that had erupted from the depths of a heart once thought soft, weak, and harmless. From that moment onward, the village would remember that no cruelty could remain hidden, and no heart, once awakened, could be broken without consequence. The village square had never felt so heavy, so alive with tension and anticipation. Ebony walked through it, her eyes glowing faintly with the steady pulse of the heart fire, the ancient force within her that had grown stronger with every betrayal revealed, every heartbeat sinking with the truths that refused to remain hidden. Those who had plotted against her, who had whispered lies and manipulated hearts, trembled visibly as she approached. Their chests felt tight, their breaths short as if the very air now weighed down on them, pressing their sins to the surface. It began subtly, a twitch in Sefu's fingers, a stammer in his voice. He tried to speak, tried to deny what had been done, tried to brush off the panic that clutched at him, but the heart fire would not allow it. Words erupted from his mouth unbidden, spilling truths he had buried deep in the dark corners of his mind. I watched her. I lied. I told them she was untrustworthy. I made her think. His sentences tumbled over themselves, each fragment a nail in the coffin of his own deception. The villagers watched, mouths open, as the young man confessed to every manipulation, every deceit, every moment he had intended to harm Ebony. The aunt followed, her attempts to hold composure failing instantly. Her lips moved as if controlled by the invisible pulse of the heart fire, words she had rehearsed, excuses she had planned, all twisting into confessions she had never intended to voice. I envied her. I hated her kindness. I tried to turn them against her. I watched. I plotted. Her voice cracked and tears poured freely, soaking the dirt beneath her feet. The villager stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by the sudden rawness of the truth laid bare. Even neighbors who had once feared her now felt a shiver of justice, a sudden awareness that lies could not linger when confronted by the force of someone's awakened heart. Others, minor conspirators who had whispered, hidden, and colluded in secret, began to tremble uncontrollably. The heart fire extended beyond Ebony's glowing eyes, reaching into their chests, tugging at concealed guilt, summoning words that would expose the full extent of their treachery. No one could resist, no one could hide. Shame spread like wildfire through the crowd, flushing cheeks, trembling hands, lowered heads, and swallowed gasps. Families who had been deceived, friends who had doubted, witnesses who had kept silent, all now saw the web of lies unraveling under the unstoppable force of truth. But the heart fire did not stop at confession. Ebony felt it pulse within her, demanding more than mere words. The ancient force sought balance, a restoration of the natural order. Confessions alone were not enough. There needed to be acknowledgement, remorse, and a shift in the hearts of the guilty. Every whispered apology, every shuddering acknowledgement of wrongs done, was absorbed by the fire, each act of truth a necessary step toward the harmony that had been broken. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square, it became clear to the villagers that this was no ordinary reckoning. Ebony's presence, her awakened heart fire, demanded honesty and integrity, a confrontation with deeds long hidden. One by one the liars spoke, stumbled, wept, and recognized the weight of their actions. And through it all, Ebony remained calm, her glowing eyes steady, the pulse of her heart synchronizing with the rhythms of justice. letting the village witness that while words could expose, true balance required the courage to feel the consequences fully. As night fell over the village, the moon rose pale and heavy, casting a silver glow over the earth. Ebony walked toward the sacred grove at the edge of the forest, her bare feet barely feeling the soil beneath them. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, as the heart fire within her pulsed with an intensity that had grown uncontrollable. The warmth in her chest now seemed alive, thrumming with energy that stretched beyond the limits of her body, spilling into the air around her, bending the shadows and calling forth unseen presences. The grove, a place of ancient power, known to the villagers only in whispers, responded to her approach. Trees leaned slightly inward, their leaves rustling without wind, as though acknowledging the arrival of the one chosen to wield justice. As she entered the grove, the light of the heart fire expanded outward, brighter than torchlight, bathing every tree, every stone, and every clearing in a golden shimmer that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The air grew thick, vibrating with energy, and figures began to appear. Spirits of ancestors, their forms ethereal yet commanding, their eyes shimmering with unyielding authority. They gathered around her in a perfect circle, silent and unwavering, each presence carrying centuries of wisdom, courage, and righteous judgment. They did not speak aloud, but their intention was clear. This was the night of reckoning, the moment where balance would be restored and deception confronted with unflinching truth. Her stepbrother and aunt, dragged as if by invisible threads of light, stumbled into the grove behind her, their faces pale with fear and disbelief. They had tried to flee the consequences of their actions, but the heart fire would not allow escape. As soon as they stood within the circle, the energy around them intensified, pressing against their chests, bending their perception until the world dissolved into visions of the past. Every lie they had spoken, every betrayal, every cruelty inflicted upon Ebony, unfolded before them as if reality itself had become a mirror reflecting their misdeeds. Sephew gasped as he saw himself whispering falsehoods to villagers, mocking Ebony's kindness behind her back, plotting to manipulate her suitor's feelings, and dismissing her as weak. Each act replayed in vivid detail, and with every repetition he felt the same shame, fear, and helplessness that Ebony must have felt in those moments. His chest tightened painfully, his heart racing, as the visions forced him to relive the consequences of his cruelty, to feel the emotional weight he had tried to ignore. The aunt writhed as she confronted herself in these visions, seeing her own envy and bitterness etched across the years. She remembered mocking Ebony's skill with herbs, withholding comfort, twisting household chores into punishment, and plotting to make her obedient and powerless. Each memory hit her like a strike, a reflection of the suffering she had caused, and the heart fire amplified the sensation, making her feel each wound she had inflicted as if it had been carved into her own heart. The villagers watching from the edges of the grove could see the transformation. The guilty were no longer hiding behind masks or excuses. Their faces twisted in anguish, bodies shuddering as the visions forced them to confront the full extent of their actions. They did not scream at Ebony, nor did they fight against her. The heart fire demanded neither vengeance nor violence, only truth and acknowledgement. Every cruel word, every manipulation, every act intended to break her was now a reflection of itself, an unyielding judgment that they could not avoid. Through it all, Ebony stood at the center, her glowing eyes calm, the pulse of her heart fire steady yet immense. She did not revel in their torment, for her power was not born of malice but of balance. The spirits circled, their presence guiding the energy, ensuring that punishment matched the weight of wrongdoing, that each torment reflected exactly what had been caused. One by one the betrayers gasped, trembled, and wept, facing emotional torment equal to the suffering they had inflicted, and through their anguish the balance slowly began to return. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the grove, the storm of visions and pain began to subside. The guilty remained shaken, transformed, and profoundly aware of the harm they had caused. And Ebony, the girl whose heart had once been broken, now stood as the living embodiment of truth, justice, and the unyielding force of the heart fire, her power undeniable, her purpose fulfilled. By the time the village stirred awake the following morning, the consequences of the heart fire's judgment had already begun to unfold. Sephew's face, once proud and arrogant, was hollowed with fear and confusion. His whispers to villagers, his manipulations and petty cruelties now returned to him tenfold, echoing through every corner of his life. Friends who had once followed him distanced themselves, unsettled by the intensity of the truth they had witnessed. Neighbors who had tolerated his arrogance now recoiled in suspicion, their trust shattered by the revelations forced into the open by the ancestral fire that pulsed through Ebony. Every status he had relied upon, every advantage gained by deceit, dissolved like sand slipping through desperate fingers. The ant fared no better. The villagers, once hesitant to confront her because of age or tradition, now stared openly at her with a mixture of fear and disapproval. Those who had once supported her manipulations turned away, unwilling to be associated with one so clearly revealed. Her wealth and authority within the household, her subtle dominion over chores and decisions, evaporated under the scrutiny of truth. For the first time in years she understood what it meant to be powerless, stripped not by Ebony's hand, but by the weight of her own cruelty reflected back through the heart fire. Both Sephew and his mother found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by visions that returned relentlessly. Every manipulation, every insult, every attempt to belittle or control Ebony, played in endless loops before their eyes, each scenario amplified until their own minds could no longer distinguish between memory and punishment. They clutched at their heads, wailing in panic as the reality settled over them. It was not a curse from Ebony, nor a vengeance she enacted with intent. The fire of ancestors, awakened by her heartbreak and compassion, had magnified the natural consequences of their deeds. Their downfall was self-forged. They had built a prison of cruelty, and the heart fire simply illuminated its walls. The village itself watched as the ripple effects spread outward. Sephew's allies, those who had enabled him out of fear or convenience, now faced isolation. Rumors of deceit and cruelty followed them, once subtle whispers now impossible to ignore. Even minor participants, those who had spread lies in small ways, trembled at the realization that their involvement could not be hidden. Every act intended to harm Ebony had boomeranged, every whispered plot returned, sharpened and undeniable. The heart fire acted not out of spite, but as a mirror, reflecting exactly what had been sown, demanding the villagers confront the consequences of their choices. Ebony, standing at the edge of the village as the first sunlight touched the thatched rooftops, watched quietly. Her glowing eyes had dimmed to a steady pulse, her power contained yet undeniably present. The downfall she observed was not a creation of malice or revenge. It was the natural outcome of cruelty amplified by an awakened force older than the village itself. Those who had sought to break her had instead destroyed themselves. Their shame, confusion and loss of allies revealed a simple truth. The heart fire punished only when injustice had been committed, and only in proportion to the weight of betrayal and harm inflicted. By mid-morning, the villagers whispered among themselves, their fear tempered by awe. The downfall of Sephew, his mother and other conspirators was complete. And though none could touch the heart fire directly, all understood that its presence would remain a silent, enduring reminder. Cruelty may rise unchecked for a time, but when exposed to truth, it consumes it. The sun rose over the village, spilling golden light across rooftops and fields, illuminating a world transformed. Ebony stood at the edge of the market, the heart fire within her now steady, calm and radiant. The storm of judgment had passed, leaving behind only the echoes of truth and the remnants of those who had tried to destroy her. Her heart, once fractured and heavy with betrayal, now beat with an unshakable rhythm, a steady pulse that radiated warmth, strength and resilience. Each breath she took carried the light of the ancestors, a blessing that had tempered her pain and forged her into something greater than she had ever known. The villagers watched her approach, a mixture of awe, reverence and quiet fear in their eyes. Those who had doubted her kindness, those who had whispered and plotted, now lowered their heads in humility, recognizing the depth of her power and the purity of her spirit. Yet even as they stared, they felt drawn to her warmth, sensing that her presence no longer carried the fragility of a soft heart, but the strength of one tempered by both sorrow and revelation. Children ran to her side, unafraid, sensing safety in her glowing calm. Women whispered greetings, eyes shining with respect. Men nodded, acknowledging the authority she now held, not through fear or force, but through the undeniable proof of justice and wisdom. Ebony's steps were gentle yet deliberate as she moved through the village. She greeted each person with a smile that carried the weight of empathy, her touch a balm that soothed wounds both physical and unseen. She tended to the injured, comforted the frightened, and offered guidance to those unsure how to rebuild what had been broken. Her voice, calm and unwavering, carried a resonance that seemed to clear doubts and illuminate hidden truths. People found themselves speaking honestly in her presence, confessing mistakes and seeking guidance, not because they feared her power, but because her light inspired trust, respect, and clarity. Her gift with herbs and healing, once admired but sometimes dismissed, now took on a new significance. Every plant she touched, every poultice she prepared, seemed infused with the glow of the heart fire. Illnesses and pains, both physical and spiritual, responded to her care, and villagers began to understand that the strength of her heart had become a force for transformation. Ebony's compassion was no longer vulnerability, it was a weapon of clarity and restoration, a bridge between the human and the divine. As the days passed, the village shifted. Old quarrels dissolved, long-held grudges softened, and the people began to act with newfound honesty, inspired by the example of the young woman who had endured betrayal and emerged unbroken. The household that had once sought to control and diminish her now followed her lead, performing tasks with respect and acknowledging the wrongs they had committed. Sephew and his mother remained humbled, forced to confront their own failures while observing the light Ebony carried. Ebony herself, though radiant with power, remained gentle and approachable. She spoke of balance, of truth, and of the lessons her heartbreak had taught. Her presence reminded the villagers that strength did not require cruelty, and wisdom did not demand fear. She guided them with patience, using the heart fire not as a weapon, but as a source of illumination, healing, and understanding. By evening, the village had gathered near the central clearing, and Ebony looked out over them, her chest glowing softly, her eyes serene yet powerful. She had been reborn, her heart whole and shining, and the people knew that she was no longer just a healer of bodies, but a guardian of truth, a guide in the ways of justice and a symbol of resilience. In her, the village saw hope restored, the balance of the world reaffirmed, and a force of compassion and clarity that would endure long after the storms of betrayal had faded. The girl with the soft heart had returned, stronger than ever, a living beacon of the heart fire and the wisdom of generations.